Welcome back to Forgotten Ties, the channel for buried secrets and truths that were never meant to be found. We build our lives on a foundation of memories, on the stories our parents tell us, on the gravestones we lay flowers upon. We believe in death the way we believe in the sunrise. But what happens when one of those foundation stones is just a lie? What happens when the person you've mourned for 30 years never actually left? Today's story isn't about a ghost. It's about something far more terrifying. A truth hidden in plain sight, a name in a column of data, an existence that was systematically erased. This is the story of Mark, a man who discovered that the funeral he attended as a boy was a performance. Mark, at 42, was a man of order. He was an architect, someone who found comfort in clean lines, in concrete and glass, in the unwavering logic of physics. His apartment in Chicago was a testament to control. Every book was flush. Not a speck of dust dared to settle on the stainless steel surfaces. This order was his fortress. It was built to keep out the chaos of the one defining loss that had shaped him. When he was 10, his mother, Evelyn, died. The story, as told by his father, Arthur, was brief and brutal. A brain aneurysm. She was gardening and then she was gone. Quick, painless. At least, that's what Arthur had told a sobbing 10-year-old Mark. Arthur, a severe, respected professor of history, had handled his wife's death with a rigid, almost cold dignity. Their home became quieter, more disciplined. Love was replaced by schedules. Mark grew up believing his mother was an angel taken too soon, a beautiful but distant memory. Her grave in St. James Cemetery was a physical, tangible sight for his grief. Mark's orderly life began to fracture on a rainy Tuesday night. He was doing what many people his age start to do, genealogical research. It wasn't an emotional pursuit. For Mark, it was a data-gathering exercise. He wanted to digitize old photos, confirm dates, create a neat map of his lineage. He had his mother's death certificate, filed away in a digital folder. Evelyn Rose Turner. Date of death, May 14, 1993. He sat there, clicking through online archives. He found his family in the 1990 census. Arthur, head. Evelyn, wife. Mark, son. All in its proper order. It was a snapshot of the perfect life he vaguely remembered. Then, on a whim, he clicked on the 2000 census record. He knew what he would find. Arthur, head, and Mark, son. Evelyn would be gone. An absence recorded in data. The page loaded. He scanned. Arthur Turner, head. Mark Turner, son. And then he froze. His blood turned to ice. There was a third name. Evelyn Turner, wife. Marital status, married. Couldn't be right. It had to be a clerical error. A glitch. It's a glitch, he muttered to himself, his heart hammering against his ribs. He closed the window, but the image was seared into his mind. A glitch. It had to be. But Mark was a man who didn't believe in easy glitches. He got up from his desk, pacing his sterile apartment, his sense of order violated. He went back to the computer. This time, he searched for the 2010 census. He was 30 by then, living on his own. The page loaded. Arthur Turner, head. And below it, another name. Evelyn Turner, wife. 17 years after she was buried. Mark's stare at the screen was no longer the curiosity of a genealogist. It was the cold horror of someone who had just seen a ghost. Twice. 2 federal census records, a decade apart, both claiming his mother was living in his childhood home, long after he'd placed a white rose on her casket. His logic spun, trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe his father had never updated his records? Maybe a lazy census taker had just copied old information? But that didn't make sense. The 2010 data had removed him from the household, which meant it had been updated. But it had kept her. The contradiction was a spike in his brain. His grief, the grief he had neatly filed away for 30 years, began to leak, twisting into something sharp and dark. Suspicion. He went back to the 2000 record, the first one he'd dismissed. He looked closer. This time, he didn't just look at the name. He looked at the detailed columns. Arthur, Occupation, professor. Mark, occupation, student. Evelyn, he held his breath. The 1990 census had listed her occupation as artist. The 2000 census listed a single word that made Mark grip his chair. It didn't say homemaker. It didn't say artist. It said institutionalized. Institutionalized. The word replayed in his head like a funeral dirge. Not retired. Not disabled. Institutionalized. It implied a place, a facility. It implied a confinement. The truth began to form in Mark's mind. A hideous, jigsaw puzzle truth. An aneurysm. Quick. Painless. Lies. It was all lies. His father, the man of historical fact and academic precision, had lied to him. But why? The shaking started in his hands. He was no longer investigating his ancestry. He was excavating a crime. He needed proof beyond a census anomaly. He went back to the death certificate, the document he had accepted without question. May 14, 1993. Cause of death: cerebral hemorrhage. Signing physician: Dr. Elias Thorne. A name Mark had never heard. He typed Dr. Elias Thorne, Chicago, into a search engine. The first result wasn't an obituary or a respectable medical practice. It was an archived article from the Chicago Tribune, dated 1995. The headline: Local doctor loses license for falsification of records, gross negligence. Mark felt the air suck out of his lungs. His father hadn't just lied. He'd had an accomplice. A disgraced doctor had signed a fraudulent death certificate. The veil of order he had built around himself was ripped away. His mother hadn't died of an aneurysm. She had been erased, hidden, put somewhere. The word institutionalized haunted him. He began a new, frantic search. He wasn't looking for Evelyn Turner. That was a name attached to a grave. He was looking for facilities, asylums, long-term care homes in the Chicago area that were operating in the early 90s. He cross-referenced public intake records, most of which were sealed, with facilities that had since been closed. He found one name: St. Jude's Hospital, a long-term psychiatric facility that had been shut down in 2012 for its horrific conditions and abuse allegations. It was infamous, and it was only 40 miles from his childhood home. He couldn't prove it. Not yet. But he knew in his gut. He knew that's where his father had hidden her. The question was no longer if his mother was alive. The question was now a much more terrifying one. Where is she now? And his father, Arthur, the man who had taught him right from wrong, was going to answer for it. The silence in Mark's apartment was now suffocating. His order was gone, replaced by the cold, precise fury of an architect who discovers his building's foundation is rotten. He hadn't slept. He had spent 2 days building his case, not with brick and mortar, but with scraps of data. The census records, the article on Dr. Thorne, the dark history of St. Jude's Hospital. He had everything but a confession. It was time to confront the architect of the lie. He drove to his childhood home, a brick Tudor that now seemed more like a mausoleum than a house. Arthur was in his study, surrounded by his leather-bound history books, a fortress of verified truth. He looked up, his eyes milky behind thick glasses. "Mark," he said, his voice as dry as parchment. "You didn't call." Mark placed a printout of the 2000 census record on the polished mahogany desk. "Can you explain this?" Arthur squinted at the paper. He saw his name, Mark's name, and her name. "It's a clerical error," he said, his tone dismissive. "The government is always making mistakes." Mark's voice was ice. "Then they made the same mistake in 2010. Curious. And institutionalized. Dad? Was that a clerical error, too?" Arthur's composure faltered. A small crack appeared in his dignified facade. "What are you talking about?" Mark threw the article about Dr. Thorne onto the desk. "Elias Thorne. He lost his license for falsifying records. Is he the one who helped you falsify Mom's death?" Silence filled the room. The ticking of the grandfather clock on the mantel sounded like hammer blows. Arthur took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. For the first time in his life, Mark saw his father look small. "You don't understand," Arthur whispered. "You don't know what she became." And then the dam broke. The story poured out, not as a confession, but as a pained justification. Evelyn hadn't died. But to Arthur, she had become worse. After Mark was born, she had changed. Not all at once, but slowly. Postpartum depression that no one talked about in the 80s had curdled into something darker. Psychosis. She would have good days, where she was the Evelyn he loved. The artist with the vibrant red hair, not brown, Mark noted bitterly, and the booming laugh. But then there were the other days. The days she accused Arthur of plotting against her, the days she didn't recognize Mark, the days she screamed about monsters in the walls. Arthur, a man of reputation and logic, couldn't cope. It was the shame, the fear, the inconvenience. "I tried," he insisted, his voice cracking. "We tried medication, doctors, but she wasn't getting better. She was dangerous." The fateful night in May 1993, Evelyn had suffered a particularly violent episode. She had taken a kitchen knife, not to threaten anyone, but herself. It was the final straw for Arthur. He called Thorne, an old family friend. Together they hatched a plan. A cruel, efficient plan. They would tell Mark she died of an aneurysm. A quick, clean death. A tidy tragedy. Thorne handled the paperwork, declaring her dead. And Arthur drove Evelyn to St. Jude's, checked her in under a variation of her maiden name, with strict instructions. No visitors. No mail. He had buried his wife alive to maintain the order of his life. The census records? Arthur scoffed. It was the final irony. An overworked census taker, tasked with auditing institutions, must have found her real name in some old log and, in a bureaucratic flourish, listed her as his wife, still living at his address. An accidental truth slipping through the cracks of a carefully constructed lie. Mark listened, his rage giving way to a profound nausea. His life, his grief, 30 years of mourning a ghost. "Where is she now?" Mark demanded, his voice trembling. Arthur looked away toward his books. St. Jude's closed in 2012. They transferred the patients. "I don't know. I stopped paying. I assumed she was dead. For real." That admission hit Mark harder than the initial lie. I assumed she was dead. His father hadn't just buried his mother alive once. He'd done it twice. The first time with deceit, and the second time with indifference. The 30-year lie had collapsed, leaving Mark in the rubble of a life he never knew. He left his father's study without another word. Their relationship, already strained, was now utterly broken, beyond repair. Arthur was a stranger, a monster hiding behind a veneer of academia. But Mark had no time for hatred. He had a mission. His mother was out there, lost, in the system. Where had the patients from St. Jude's gone? It was an administrative nightmare. Mark, with his architect's precision, got to work. He hired a private investigator, a tired-eyed ex-cop who specialized in finding people who had been erased. They started with the closure records for St. Jude's. It was a mess. Patients had been scattered to dozens of facilities across the state, many records lost or destroyed. But the investigator, using some old contacts and a lot of cash, found a lead. A female patient, E. May, had been transferred to the Illinois State Medical Facility. E. May. It had to be her. They followed the trail. E. May was only there for 6 months before that facility cut its budget. She was moved to a private nursing home. That home went bankrupt. She was moved back into the state system. It was a revolving door of neglect. Mark's mother was a damaged parcel, pushed from one loading dock to another. Took 3 weeks. 3 agonizing, breathless weeks where Mark lived on coffee and the terror of what he might find. Finally, they found her. She was in the Rolling Fields nursing home, a state-funded facility outside Peoria, 3 hours from Chicago. The name on the file, Evelyn May. Status: no family contact. Mark drove through the rain, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. What would he say? What would he do? The woman he was about to meet wasn't the 29-year-old artist from his memories. She was a 68-year-old woman who had endured 30 years of institutionalization. He walked in. The place smelled of disinfectant and sadness. A nurse led him to a common room, and then he saw her. She was sitting by a window, staring out at the rain. Her hair, once that vibrant red, was now silver-white and thin. She was frail, her shoulders slumped. She looked nothing like the pictures. She was a total stranger. He approached slowly. "Evelyn?" She turned. Her eyes, green like he remembered, but clouded by years of medication, looked at him without recognition. He sat down across from her. "It's Mark," he said, his voice thick. "I'm your son." Nothing. No spark. Just an empty, passive gaze. Mark's heart shattered. He had found her, but he had lost her long ago. He didn't give up. Mark had her moved to the best private facility money could buy. He visited every week. He brought old photographs. He played the classical music his father said she used to love. Sometimes he thought he saw a flicker, a ghost of a smile when he told a joke, a faint squeeze of his hand. But she was gone. 30 years of confinement, medication, and isolation had taken their toll. Mark had found a shell. Arthur was never prosecuted. There was no crime for moral cruelty. But he died alone in his house full of books, haunted by the truth he tried to bury. For Mark, that census record was both a curse and a blessing. It destroyed his past, but it gave him a chance to give his mother dignity in her final years. It was proof that the truth, no matter how deep you bury it, has a way of rising to the surface. What you've just heard is a reminder that the darkest secrets are often found not in graveyards, but in filing cabinets. Thank you for joining Forgotten Ties. Don't forget to like this video if it made you think, and subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss what we unearth next. Stay safe and always question your own history.